We're going to continue on with our legislative notes. We're going to talk about elections. Elections are held, or general elections are held the Tuesday following the first Monday in November of every even number year. So this is 2014, so we are going to have an election this November. Off-year elections are the elections where the president is not running. So this is an off-year election. The president is not up for re-election or having someone else enter that particular office. Single-member district elections, that's where you only vote for the member running in your particular district. Indiana has 9 members in the House of Representatives, and the state is divided up into 9 different districts. And so we live in the 2nd district. And so in the House of Representatives election, we only get to vote for the person who is running in the 2nd district. We don't get a vote for any of the other districts. So this is a single-member district election. At-large elections are where everyone in the state gets to vote, and so those are Senate elections. Everyone in the state of Indiana gets to vote for the 2 senators. So single-member district elections are for House elections for states that have more than 1 district. At-large elections, everyone in the state gets to vote. And the incumbent is the current office holder running for re-election. So all the members of Indiana's House of Representatives, they're all 9 up for re-election this November, and so the one that is currently holding that office that is running again, they would be considered or called the incumbent. And they have really a great advantage in running for office. They are the current office holder. They have some power. They have name recognition. They're the person that we know. The other person is we don't know that person. We don't know what they're going to do. So a lot of time we continue to re-elect the incumbent at almost, a 90% rate. That's really important because Congress's approval rating is in the teens, if not lower than that. I mean, people are very, very unhappy with Congress, but we continue to re-elect incumbents at almost 90% because we know who they are, and typically they do a good job for their district and for the constituents. Talking about the Senate a little bit, once again going back to this great compromise during the Constitutional Convention, the smaller states wanted to maintain that equal representation. So the compromise was the House would be based on population, the Senate will have equal representation. So every state has 2 senators, so there are 50 states, so we have 100 total. Dan Coats is one of our senators, and he is a Republican, and Joe Donnelly, who is a Democrat, is actually the junior senator. So Dan Coats is the senior senator, Joe Donnelly, because he hasn't served as long as the junior senator. Originally, senators were chosen by the state legislature. They were to be elected to represent the state. The House represented the people, but the Senate represented the state's interests. But we have the 17th Amendment, and so now the Senate is also elected by the people. They serve for a 6-year staggered term. So 1/3, or 33 or 34, depending on which election, are up for election every 2 years. So this is called a continuous body. You never have all members up for election at the same time. In the House of Representatives, every 2 years, all 435 members, 100% of the House, are up for re-election. But in the Senate, you have 33, and then 2 years later, a different 33, and then 2 years after that, the last 34. So that 6 years later, the 33 that were up for this year will come up again. So it is staggered. It is called a continuous body, and only 1/3 is up every 2 years. 2 senators from one state are never up for re-election the same year. So Dan Coats was elected in 2010. Joe Donnelly was elected in 2012, and so in 2016, Dan Coats will be up, and then in 2018, Joe Donnelly will. And there's obvious exceptions if someone dies or if someone resigns in the middle of their term, but for the most part, they are never up for election at the same time. The constitutional requirements to be in the Senate, you have to be 30 years old, a citizen of the United States for 9 years, and you have to live in the state that you are running. We talked about how the House is responsible for impeaching, and all that means is is there enough evidence to have a trial? So the House looks at all of the evidence and they say either yes, there is enough evidence to have a trial, and if they say that, they take a vote, and that's impeaching the president. And once again, we have had 2 presidents who have been impeached. Bill Clinton was impeached, and Andrew Johnson, who took over for Abraham Lincoln during the time of Reconstruction, he was also impeached. That does not mean they lose their jobs. That does not mean they're thrown out of office. That just means they haven't been indicted. There is enough evidence that we think we can hold a trial, and that trial itself is held in the Senate. And the Chief Justice is actually the presiding officer over that. Typically, when we have impeachment trials, the Vice President would be the one who would be the judge over that. But since the Vice President would be taking the office of the President if he was found guilty, then that's obviously a conflict of interest. So in times where the impeachment is for the President, then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would be the one who would be the judge in that. So they hold the trials for impeachment, and then they confirm all presidential appointments. So the President gets to appoint, but the Senate has to confirm them. And the other thing they do is they ratify treaties that have been negotiated by the President. Leadership in the House of Representatives. We talked about the importance of political parties because everything that's done in Congress is broken down basically by party. And so whatever party controls the House and the Senate, gets to pretty much run things. So the Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. So Speaker of the House is John Boehner. He is a Republican, and he is from the state of Ohio. He has been elected by the majority party of the House. So the House of Representatives gets to elect who they want their speaker, and the majority party always obviously gets the win on that. And so it's always a member of the majority party. The job of the speaker is to preside and keep order in the House, and they follow the vice president in the line of succession. And so if something ever happened to the president and the vice president at the same time, and that's critical, both of those offices must be vacant before the speaker would become president. They are third in line, or actually that would be second in line. They may debate and they may vote as members, but they must vote to break a tie. But if the bill is of one vote away from ending in a tie, and the Speaker of the House does not like this and wants to kill it, they can actually vote to create a tie. So that's very important. They vote to break ties, but they can also vote to create a tie. If they create a tie, then the bill dies. The majority leader right now is Eric Cantor. And the majority leader's responsibility is to represent the Republicans on the House floor. The minority leader, Nancy Pelosi, is a Democrat, and actually the Democrats a few years ago had control of the House of Representatives, and she was actually the Speaker of the House, and she was the first female Speaker of the House. And their responsibility is to represent the Democrats. Whips are responsible for keeping track of the votes. The term whip actually comes from the whipper-in, and it comes from fox hunting, and it was the responsibility of the whip to keep all the hounds bunched together in packs so you don't have one running off. And so the whip's responsibility in Congress, keep track of the votes, and so when John Boehner calls for a vote, his whip knows the vote count, he knows who's voting for it, knows who's voting against it, so they typically do not bring important bills to the floor if they know that they don't have the votes, because that's the whip's job to know that. And this is a picture of John Boehner. This is Eric Cantor, majority leader, and this is Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader. So leadership in the Senate. You have the president of the Senate, who is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is also the vice president. Being the president of the Senate is one of 2 constitutional duties of the vice president. And so right now the Senate is controlled by the Democrats. Joe Biden is a Democrat, but that's not always the case. If the Republicans controlled it right now, you would have the president of the Senate being a Democrat. So the only reason the president of the Senate is who it is because it's appointed to the vice president, and that comes from the Constitution. His only function is to break ties. Because Joe Biden is not a member of Congress, he cannot debate, he cannot vote any other time unless there is a tie. President pro tem right now is Patrick Leahy, and because the vice president is very busy and can't always be there, then they have a temporary president. And so he is a temporary floor leader, and they are always the longest serving member in the Senate from the majority party. So the only reason that Patrick Leahy is the president pro tem is because he's been in the Senate. He's a Democrat who's been in the Senate longer than anyone else. They're not voted, so that's how they get that position. And the current majority leader is Harry Reid. And he is, this is important, you want to star this, Harry Reid as the majority leader is the most influential member in the Senate. The president of the Senate and the president pro tem are not elected to those positions. He gets it because he's vice president. He gets it because he's been in the Senate and as a Democrat longer. Harry Reid is elected by the majority of senators, and nothing happens in the Senate unless Harry Reid says it does. So he is the most influential member in the Senate. The minority leader is Mitch McConnell, and he's a Republican, and he leads the Republican Party. And also in the Senate, they have whips. You have majority whips and minority whips, and again, they're responsible for keeping track of the votes. Joe Biden, Vice President, President of the Senate. Patrick Leahy is the President pro tem. You have Harry Reid, who is the majority leader, and then Mitch McConnell, who is the minority leader.